During a meeting about my husband's inheritance, my daughter asked me to leave the room. This is a family matter, Mom. We'll let you know later. She had no idea I had the updated will. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. This is between family, Mom. We'll let you know afterward. Aurora's words cut through me like a knife as she stood in the doorway of James's study, blocking my entry. My own daughter, looking at me as if I were an intruder in the home I had shared with my husband for 45 years. But I am family, I said, my voice barely audible. James was my husband. Aurora sighed, that impatient sound I'd become all too familiar with in recent months. We need to discuss the estate without emotional complications. Richard has financial expertise, and we need to be practical. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Richard, my son-in-law, arranging papers on James's mahogany desk. Papers about my life, my future, my home. My chest tightened. Please, Mom, Aurora added, her tone softening artificially. We won't be long. I nodded, unable to find words as she closed the door in my face. Standing in the hallway of my own home, surrounded by photographs documenting a lifetime with James, I had never felt so small, so insignificant. 3 weeks. It had been only 3 weeks since I watched them lower James into the ground. The wound was still raw, the emptiness in our bed still shocking every night. And now this final indignity. I walked slowly to the kitchen, my sanctuary for decades. The tile floor James and I had installed together in our 10th year of marriage. The window garden where my herbs still thrived, oblivious to the fact that James would never again praise my rosemary chicken. My hands trembled as I filled the kettle. From the study, I could hear muffled voices, Aurora's occasionally rising with authority. When had my shy little girl become this stranger? This woman who looked at me with calculation rather than love? As the water boiled, a memory surfaced. James 6 months ago, sitting in this very kitchen. His face already gaunt from the cancer, but his eyes still sharp, still kind. Debbie, he had said, taking my hand across the table. I've updated my will. James, please, I had protested. I can't talk about this. You have to, he insisted gently. Aurora has changed. I've seen it too. I had tried to defend her, as mothers do. She's just worried about you, about us. James shook his head. It's more than that. Promise me you'll be ready. Promise me you'll be strong when the time comes. I had promised, not understanding then what he meant. Now, alone in the kitchen, hearing my daughter and her husband planning my future without me, the weight of his warning settled fully on my shoulders. The kettle whistled, startling me back to the present. I poured the water over a tea bag, watching the color bleed out, and thought about the safe deposit box key James had pressed into my palm 2 weeks before he died. Only after I'm gone, he had whispered. When you see who they really are. I hadn't gone yet. It felt too final, too much like accepting he was truly gone. But tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would see what James had left for me. My tea grew cold as I waited. Finally, the study door opened, and Aurora emerged with Richard close behind. Her face was flushed with triumph, his with satisfaction. All done, Mom, she announced brightly. We've worked out a plan that will take care of everything. Everything, I echoed. The house, the accounts, your care going forward, Richard explained with professional detachment. You don't need to worry about a thing. Aurora, I said, looking directly at my daughter, James and I made decisions together about our estate. Shouldn't I be part of this conversation? Her smile tightened. Dad left us in charge of managing things, Mom. The paperwork is clear. She placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture that felt more proprietary than comforting. You're still grieving. We don't want to burden you with details. I looked at her hand, then at her face. This woman who had once been my tiny daughter, who I had nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, now patting me like a child who couldn't be trusted with adult matters. I see, I said quietly, though I was beginning to see far more than she realized. We'll handle everything, she repeated, squeezing my shoulder. Trust me, Mom. It's what Dad would have wanted. But as I watched them leave with copies of documents I hadn't been allowed to see, I remembered James's face in those final days. His concern, his foresight, his quiet determination as he updated his will without Aurora's knowledge. Be ready, he had told me. And finally I understood what he meant. Tomorrow I would open that safe deposit box. Tomorrow I would see what James had really wanted. The bank manager led me to the private room where I could examine the contents of James's safe deposit box. My hands trembled as I inserted the key, wondering what final messages my husband had left for me. Inside the metal box lay a thick manila envelope with my name written in James's distinct handwriting. I opened it carefully, as if preserving the last touch of his fingers against the paper. The first document was his updated will, notarized 6 months ago. As I read through the legal language, my breath caught. James had left everything to me, the house, his investments, all of it. There was a provision for Aurora, but it wasn't what she had led me to believe. She told me I'd only get a small monthly allowance. I whispered to the empty room. Behind the will was a letter, and a USB drive labeled, "Watch this first." But what truly made my blood run cold was the third item. A folder containing bank statements, loan applications, and power of attorney documents. All with my signature. Signatures I had never written. I stared at the forged documents, my mind racing. Had Aurora been planning this for years? My own daughter? I needed to get home and see what was on that USB drive. When I arrived, the house was mercifully empty. Aurora had mentioned something about meeting with the realtor, a comment that now took on new meaning. I plugged the USB drive into James's computer and found a single video file. James's face filled the screen, thinner than I remembered but with that familiar determined set to his jaw. "Debbie, my love," he began, his voice bringing fresh tears to my eyes. "If you're watching this, then you've seen the will and the documents. I'm sorry to leave this burden to you, but you need to know the truth." He explained how he'd discovered Aurora and Richard's plans nearly a year ago. How they'd been systematically positioning themselves to take control of our assets after his death. How they'd discussed putting me in assisted living, not because I needed it, but because it would give them free rein over the house and our savings. "I confronted Aurora," James continued, his eyes sad. "She denied everything, claimed she was just trying to help organize our finances. But I found the loan applications with your forged signature. They've borrowed nearly $200,000 in your name, Debbie." I gasped, remembering Aurora's new car, the vacation home renovations, expenses that had seemed excessive even on Richard's salary. "I changed my will immediately," James said. "Everything goes to you with specific provisions to protect you from them. The new will is filed with Walter Griffin. He's expecting your call." The video continued, James detailing everything he'd discovered and the steps he'd taken to protect me. When it ended, I sat frozen, staring at his frozen image on the screen, the final frame of the last message he would ever send me. The front door opened, startling me from my shocked trance. I quickly ejected the USB drive and slipped it into my pocket. "Mom? You home?" Aurora called out. I closed the computer and took a deep breath before answering. "In the study, dear." She appeared in the doorway, her smile faltering when she saw me at James's desk. "What are you doing in here?" "Just remembering," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. "James spent so much time in this room." Aurora's expression softened with practiced sympathy. "I know you miss him, but we need to start thinking about practical matters." She perched on the edge of the desk. "Actually, I'm glad I caught you. Richard and I were talking, and we think it might be time to consider selling the house." "Selling?" I echoed, though after watching James's video, I wasn't surprised. "It's so big for just you, Mom. The maintenance, the stairs. We're concerned about you living here alone." "Where would I go?" I asked, testing her. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. "There's a lovely retirement community near us. We've already looked into it. You'd have your own apartment, activities, people your age." Her hand covered mine in a gesture that once would have seemed loving but now felt calculating. "It would be so much better than rattling around this big house by yourself." I studied my daughter's face, searching for traces of the little girl who once climbed into my lap for comfort, who drew me pictures signed with wobbly hearts. When had she changed? When had money and possessions become more important than my happiness? "I'm not ready to leave my home," I said simply. Aurora's smile tightened. "Mom, we're not asking you to decide today. But the market is excellent right now, and Dad would want us to be practical." She stood, smoothing her expensive dress. "Richard is meeting with our financial advisor tomorrow. We should discuss your monthly expenses. Make sure everything transitions smoothly. Transitions. I repeated. From Dad's management to ours, she clarified, as if explaining to a child. Don't worry, we'll make sure you're taken care of. After she left, I sat in James's chair, running my fingers over the worn leather armrests. The evidence in my purse felt heavy, damning. My own daughter had been systematically preparing to take everything from me, using my grief as a weapon, treating me as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I reached for the phone and dialed the number James had left for Walter Griffin, his attorney. As it rang, I glanced at the family photo on the desk. James, me, Aurora at her college graduation. We look so happy, so normal. Mr. Griffin's office, a voice answered. This is Debbie Reynolds, I said, my resolve strengthening with each word. My husband James told me to call. I've found his will, and I need your help. The days after my meeting with Walter Griffin passed in a strange haze. I moved through my own house like a spy, careful not to let Aurora or Richard suspect that I knew their plans. Every phone call they made, every whispered conversation in corners now carried new meaning. Walter had confirmed everything. James came to me about 8 months ago, deeply concerned, he'd explained in his office. He discovered some troubling financial activities and wanted to protect you. Today was the day Aurora had set for what she called the family meeting to discuss my future. I watched from the kitchen window as her sleek car pulled into the driveway, followed by Richard's SUV. Not just Richard this time. Their friend Bernard was with them, an investment advisor who'd always looked at me with thinly veiled impatience when I asked questions about finances. Mom! Aurora called, letting herself in with the key she'd had copied without asking me. We're here. I smoothed down my cardigan and touched the USB drive in my pocket for reassurance. In the kitchen, dear. They filed in, Aurora leading with forced brightness, Richard checking his expensive watch, Bernard carrying a leather portfolio. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, invaded. Let's move to the dining room, Aurora suggested. We have a lot to go over. I followed them, noting how comfortable they were directing things in my home. Aurora had already spread papers across the table before I even sat down. Mom, she began, her voice shifting into what I now recognized as her patronizing tone. We've worked everything out. After reviewing Dad's estate, we've determined a monthly allowance that will cover your basic needs. Richard slid a paper toward me. We've calculated $1,800 per month. That should be more than adequate for your lifestyle. I looked at the number, then back at them. $1,800? From your father's pension and investments that generate over $12,000 monthly. Aurora's smile flickered. There are expenses, Mom. The house maintenance until we sell it. Investment management fees. And when were you planning to tell me about the loans you took out in my name? I asked quietly. The room went still. Aurora's face drained of color, then flushed deep red. Richard's hand froze mid-reach for another document. What are you talking about? Aurora's voice had lost its sweetness. I pulled copies of the loan documents from my pocket and placed them carefully on the table. 2 home equity loans. A personal loan. Credit cards I never applied for. All with my signature, except I never signed them. Richard recovered first. Debbie, you're confused. You signed those during James's illness. Don't you remember? The stress of that time. Stop. My voice was stronger than it had been in months. I never signed these, and we both know it. Aurora leaned forward, dropping the pretense of concern. Dad asked us to help manage things. He knew you couldn't handle the financial details. Your father knew exactly what you were doing, I interrupted. He found out about the forgeries months ago. The shock on their faces would have been satisfying if it hadn't broken my heart. My own daughter, caught in her deception, looked not remorseful but angry at being discovered. That's ridiculous, she sputtered. Dad trusted us to. To what, Aurora? To put me in a home? To sell the house I've lived in for 40 years? To spend my retirement on your renovations and vacations? Bernard, looking increasingly uncomfortable, began gathering his papers. Perhaps I should leave you to discuss family matters. Stay, Richard commanded. This is just confusion. Grief can cause memory problems, paranoia even. He turned to me, his voice softening with fake concern. Debbie, this is exactly why we're worried about you living alone. You're imagining things, creating conspiracies. I have the will, I said simply. Aurora's dismissive wave froze midair. What? James's actual will. Not whatever document you've been pretending exists. I turned to Bernard. Did they tell you they had power of attorney? That James left everything in their control. Bernard shifted uncomfortably, looking between us. That was my understanding, yes. They lied. I pulled out a copy of the will Walter had given me. James left everything to me. Every account, property, and investment. Richard snatched the document, scanning it frantically. Aurora peered over his shoulder, her face contorting as she read. This can't be real, she whispered. Dad would never. He did, I said. After he discovered what you were doing. Aurora's shock transformed into something ugly. You turned him against me. After everything we've done for you. Done for me. I repeated incredulously. You stole from me. You were planning to sell my home and put me in a facility. You can't take care of yourself. Aurora shouted, mask fully dropped now. Look at you. You're old, you're forgetful, you need supervision. Her words struck like physical blows, but I refused to flinch. I'm grieving, not incompetent. There's a difference. Richard, always the strategist, placed a restraining hand on Aurora's arm. There must be some misunderstanding. Let's all calm down. The only misunderstanding, I said, standing up, is that you thought I would quietly let you take everything James and I built together. You'll regret this, Aurora hissed, her beautiful face twisted with rage. You think you can manage without us? You'll be calling us for help within a month. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing familiar features, and felt a profound sadness wash over me. The only thing I regret is that your father had to discover what you'd become before he died. It broke his heart. Aurora grabbed her purse, knocking over a chair as she stood. This isn't over. That will can be contested. Your mental capacity can be questioned. I met her gaze steadily. Try it. Walter has the medical evaluations James insisted on getting before he changed the will. And he has evidence of your forgeries. The blood drained from Richard's face. Forgery is a criminal offense. For the first time I saw fear in their eyes. 3 days after the confrontation, my house felt both emptier and more peaceful. Aurora and Richard had stormed out, threats hanging in the air between us. In the aftermath, I changed the locks and asked Walter to handle any further communication with them. You need to see something else, Walter said, when I met him at his office that morning. James was thorough, more thorough than even I realized. He slid a thick folder across his desk. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and transcripts of recorded conversations, all meticulously organized in James's careful handwriting. He hired a private investigator? I asked, astonished as I flipped through images of Aurora and Richard meeting with realtors at coffee shops, touring retirement facilities, and once, most disturbingly, standing in our bedroom taking inventory while I was at a doctor's appointment. Walter nodded. About 7 months ago. He suspected something was wrong when Aurora started asking detailed questions about your finances, especially after she insisted on being added to your accounts, just in case. I studied a photograph of them laughing over lunch with a woman I didn't recognize. The date stamp showed it was taken while James was in the hospital during one of his treatments, a day Aurora had told us she couldn't visit because she was swamped at work. Who's this woman? I asked. Walter's expression turned grave. Carla Matthews. She's a geriatric care evaluator who specializes in competency assessments for the elderly. The implication hit me with physical force. They were building a case against me? To have me declared incompetent. James thought so. That's why he insisted on getting his own neurological evaluation and mental competency assessment before changing the will. He wanted to make sure they couldn't claim he wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes. I closed the folder, unable to look at more evidence of my daughter's betrayal. Why didn't he confront them directly? Show them he knew. Walter leaned back in his chair. He was protecting you. James knew that if they realized he'd discovered their plans, they might accelerate their timeline or try something more desperate. He wanted everything legally secured before they knew he was onto them. On my way home, I stopped at the cemetery. James's grave was still fresh, The flowers I'd brought last week wilted in the summer heat. I replaced them with new roses as I told him everything that had happened. You knew her better than I did, I whispered to the headstone. When did she change, James? Was it always there and I just didn't see it? The wind rustled the trees overhead, but there was no answer. There never would be. Back home I found an unexpected visitor waiting on my porch, Robert, James's best friend of 30 years, and the godfather we'd chosen for Aurora when she was born. Debbie, he said, standing as I approached. I heard what happened. I would have come sooner, but I've been out of the country. I invited him in, grateful for the familiar presence of someone who had known us, the real us, for so long. James told me some of it, Robert admitted as we sat in the kitchen with coffee. Not everything, but enough that I wasn't surprised when Walter called me. You knew. I felt a strange mixture of relief and hurt. Why didn't you tell me? Robert's weathered face creased with regret. James asked me not to. He said you wouldn't believe it unless you saw it for yourself. That you'd defend Aurora until the evidence was undeniable. He was right, of course. If anyone had told me my daughter was plotting against me, I would have dismissed it immediately. I had to see it with my own eyes. There's something else, Robert said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. James gave this to me before he died. Said I'd know when it was time to give it to you. Inside was a key and an address I didn't recognize. What is this? A storage unit, Robert explained. James rented it about 6 months ago. Even I don't know what's inside. He said it was for your eyes only. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, a nondescript building of metal units lined up in rows. Unit 247 was at the back, away from the main office. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the key in the lock. Inside, carefully organized on metal shelving, were dozens of boxes labeled in James's handwriting. Financial records, Aurora childhood, our wedding, family vacations. But most striking was a large whiteboard mounted on the far wall, covered in James's writing. A timeline stretching back 5 years, documenting every suspicious request, every unexplained withdrawal, every time Aurora or Richard had attempted to gain access to our accounts. Oh, James, I whispered, tracing his handwriting with my fingertips. In the center of the unit stood a desk with a laptop. A note taped to the screen read, "Password. The place we got engaged plus the year we met." I smiled despite everything. The North Point Lighthouse, 1970. Typical James, romantic even in his investigative work. The laptop came to life, revealing hundreds of files, scanned documents, spreadsheets tracking unusual financial activities, emails James had recovered between Aurora and Richard discussing their plans for after. One folder simply labeled Evidence contained recordings. Aurora's voice discussing with Richard how they would handle Mom once James was gone. "She's so trusting, it'll be easy," my daughter's voice said through the speakers. "We just need to move slowly, make her think it's all her idea." Richard's laugh followed. "Your dad's the real problem. He watches those accounts like a hawk." "Not for much longer," Aurora replied, her voice so cold I barely recognized it. "The doctor said 3 months, maybe 6. We just need to be patient." I stopped the recording, feeling physically ill. They had been waiting for James to die, counting the days, planning. The last file on the desktop was a video, dated just 2 weeks before James passed away. I clicked play with shaking hands. James appeared, looking frilier than I remembered, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Debbie," he began, "if you're watching this, then you know everything. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but I know you're stronger than you think. Stronger than they think." He paused, collecting himself. "I've spent my final months making sure you're protected instead of just being with you. And that's my only regret. But I couldn't leave knowing what they were planning." His eyes grew fierce. "They underestimated you, Deb. They always have. Now it's time to show them who you really are." As the video ended, I sat in silence, surrounded by the evidence of James's love. Not just the romantic gestures or happy memories, but this final act of protection. This painstaking documentation of truth when it would have been easier to look away. "I won't let you down," I promised him and myself. The official reading of James's will was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at Walter's office early, dressed in a blue suit James had always liked, my hair neatly styled. No more shuffling around in house slippers and cardigans like the confused old woman Aurora thought I was. You look formidable, Walter said with approval as I took a seat in the conference room. I feel formidable, I replied, surprising myself with how true it was. Robert arrived next, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze before taking the chair beside me. Then came Bernard, the financial advisor, looking distinctly uncomfortable. At precisely 9:58, Aurora and Richard swept in. Aurora had dressed the part of the grieving daughter in tasteful black, but her eyes flashed with cold determination. Richard nodded stiffly in my direction, his expression calculating. Mom, Aurora said, her voice honey-sweet again. You're looking better. I simply smiled in response, watching her falter slightly at my lack of reaction. Richard leaned toward Aurora, whispering something that made her straighten her spine and square her shoulders. They thought they still had cards to play. Let them think that. Walter cleared his throat as the clock struck 10. Thank you all for coming. We're here for the official reading of James Reynolds' last will and testament. He began with the formal legal language, and I watched Aurora and Richard closely. They were tense but confident, occasionally exchanging glances. They had a plan, that much was clear. Before we proceed to the distribution of assets, Walter continued, Mr. Reynolds included a letter to be read at this time. He removed an envelope from the file, breaking the seal. He specified that this letter must be read in its entirety before continuing. Aurora shifted impatiently. Is this really necessary? We're all familiar with Dad's sentiments. Walter ignored her, beginning to read. To my family, if you're hearing this, I have passed on, but my love and concern remain. Throughout my life, I've valued honesty, integrity, and family loyalty above all else. These aren't just words to me. They're principles I've tried to live by. Recently, I've had cause to reflect on these values and how they've been honored or dishonored within our family. I've made discoveries that have brought me great pain. Discoveries about plans made behind my back, about deception and betrayal from those I trusted most. Aurora's face drained of color. Richard grabbed her hand under the table. Walter continued reading, his voice steady. I've documented evidence of financial exploitation, forged signatures, and a coordinated effort to control my estate and to isolate and institutionalize my beloved wife, Debbie, after my death. This is ridiculous, Aurora interrupted, her voice shrill. Dad was confused at the end. The medications. Ms. Reynolds, Walter said firmly, I'm required to read this in full. James's letter went on, detailing the evidence he'd collected, the secret meetings, the forged documents, the retirement facility tours taken while I was at doctor's appointments. With each revelation, Aurora seemed to shrink smaller, her confident facade crumbling. Therefore, Walter read, reaching the final paragraph, I have made provisions in my will to protect Debbie from these machinations. I do this not out of malice but out of love, both for my wife of 45 years and yes, even for my daughter, who I hope will one day remember the values we tried to instill in her. Silence fell over the room when Walter finished. Aurora's hands trembled visibly. Richard stared at the table, jaw clenched. Now, Walter said, setting the letter aside, to the will itself. What followed was exactly what I expected, having already seen the document, but watching Aurora's face as each provision was read aloud was its own kind of vindication. The house, the investments, the savings, everything was left to me, with strict provisions preventing any attempt to contest the will. Aurora would receive a modest inheritance, but only after 10 years, and contingent upon her having no legal conflicts with me during that time. This is insane, Richard finally exploded. You can't possibly expect us to accept this. It doesn't matter whether you accept it, Walter replied calmly. This is a legally binding document, witnessed and notarized, with Mr. Reynolds' mental competency well documented. Aurora turned to me, tears suddenly streaming down her face. Mom, you know Dad wasn't thinking clearly. We were only trying to help, to make sure you were taken care of. The performance was impressive. A week ago it might have worked. By forging my signature on loan documents? I asked quietly. By planning to sell my home while I was still living in it? You don't understand, she insisted. It was for your own good. You can't manage on your own. I opened my purse and removed a small recorder, one of James's final gifts to me. I think we all understand perfectly well. I press play and Aurora's voice filled the room. Once Dad's gone, we move quickly. Get her to sign over power of attorney while she's still emotional. If she resists, we start documenting every little slip-up, every forgotten appointment, until we have enough to force the issue. Richard's voice followed. And the house. On the market by summer. We use Mom's money to clear our debts, then move her into Sunny Pines. They have those small studio apartments that are perfect. She won't need much space. I stopped the recording. Aurora's face had gone from pale to ashen. There's more, I said softly. Hours more. James was very thorough. You were recording us? Richard sputtered. That's illegal. Actually, Walter interjected. James had a licensed investigator document everything. It's all admissible, should it come to that. Aurora stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You planned this ambush. Both of you. You turned Dad against me, and now you're trying to destroy me. I looked at my daughter, this stranger wearing her face, and felt a complicated mixture of anger and grief. No, Aurora. You did this yourself. She grabbed her purse, tears still streaming. You'll regret this. You need us. You'll see. As she stormed toward the door, Richard following close behind, I called after her. Aurora. She paused, not turning around. James wanted me to tell you something, I said. He said it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Her shoulders stiffened and for a moment I thought I saw them tremble. Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her. Bernard cleared his throat awkwardly. Mrs. Reynolds, I want you to know I had no idea about any of this. They told me you had agreed to their management of the estate. I believe you, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I did. As the meeting concluded and people filed out, Robert stayed behind. Are you all right? He asked gently. I considered the question seriously. My husband was gone. My relationship with my only child was in ruins. The future I had imagined, family holidays, Aurora's support through my golden years, had evaporated. And yet, I felt strangely liberated. The truth, however painful, was finally out in the open. No, I answered honestly. But I will be. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, summer fading to autumn, then winter, and now the first tentative buds of spring appeared in my garden. I knelt in the soft earth, planting tulip bulbs along the border where James and I had always planned a new flower bed but never quite found the time. Those will look beautiful come April, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Robert standing at the garden gate, holding a bag from our favorite bakery. Since the reading of the will, he had become a regular presence in my life, bringing coffee on Sunday mornings, helping with household repairs, or sometimes just sitting quietly while we both read. I thought you might like some of those almond croissants you pretend not to love, he said, holding up the bag with a smile. I peeled off my gardening gloves and brushed the dirt from my knees. I never said I didn't love them. I said they were a sometimes treat. And today feels like a sometimes kind of day. It did. The air was crisp but not cold, the sun warm on my shoulders as we settled at the patio table. I'd made many changes to the house and garden in recent months. Not erasing James, never that, but making the space more fully mine. The heavy drapes in the living room had been replaced with light, gauzy curtains. The formal dining room was now my art studio, where I'd returned to painting for the first time in decades. Have you heard anything? Robert asked carefully as he poured coffee from the thermos he'd brought. I knew what he meant. Aurora. A card at Christmas, I said. Very formal. Signed by both of them. Robert nodded, not pressing further. He knew how much the estrangement hurt, despite everything. A mother doesn't simply stop loving her child, even when that child has wounded her deeply. After the will reading, Aurora and Richard had vanished from my life. Through mutual friends, I heard they'd moved to Phoenix, where Richard had accepted a position with a new firm. The distance was perhaps a blessing. It gave us all space to process what had happened. I've been thinking, I said, changing the subject, about the trip. James and I had always dreamed of visiting Italy together. We'd planned it for our retirement, walking the streets of Rome, taking a gondola in Venice, seeing the art we'd only viewed in books. Cancer had stolen that dream like so many others. The Amalfi Coast in June, I continued. I've already booked the flights. Robert's face brightened. Debbie, that's wonderful. I'd like you to come with me, I added, the words coming out in a rush. As a friend, I clarified quickly. I'd value the company, and James always said you were the best travel companion. A complicated emotion crossed Robert's face. Pleasure, hesitation, something else I couldn't quite name. I'd be honored, he said finally. Truly. We sat in comfortable silence, watching a pair of cardinals flit among the trees. In the months since James's death, I'd learned that grief doesn't follow a predictable path. It comes in waves, receding for a time only to crash back unexpectedly at the sight of his favorite coffee mug, or the smell of his aftershave on a jacket I hadn't yet donated. But I was learning to live alongside it, to carry my love for James while still moving forward. It's what he would have wanted. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Expecting someone? Robert asked. I shook my head, rising to answer it. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out a slender female figure. My heart quickened. Aurora? But when I opened the door, I found a young woman I didn't recognize, perhaps in her early 20s, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Mrs. Reynolds? She asked. Yes. My name is Lily. Lily Chun. I'm a student at the community college and She hesitated, clutching a folder to her chest. I'm in Professor Walker's creative writing class. He said you might be willing to talk to me. I smiled, recognizing the name of the writing instructor at the college where I'd recently begun taking classes. About my memoir project? She nodded eagerly. I'm focusing on personal narratives for my thesis, especially stories of resilience in older women. Professor Walker said your story was remarkable. I glanced back at Robert, who gave me an encouraging nod. Come in, Lily. Would you like some coffee? We have croissants. As we settled in the living room, Lily took out a notebook and pen. Professor Walker only told me the basics, that you lost your husband and had a difficult time with family afterward. Would you be comfortable sharing more? I considered the young woman before me, her earnest expression, her eagerness to understand a life so different from her own. 6 months ago I might have deflected, keeping my pain private. But James had taught me one final lesson through all of this. Truth, however difficult, was always better than comfortable lies. It started with a family meeting, I began. A meeting I wasn't allowed to attend. 2 hours later, as Lily prepared to leave, her notebook filled with my story, she paused at the door. Mrs. Reynolds, can I ask you something personal? After everything I've just told you? Of course. Are you still hoping to reconcile with your daughter someday? The question caught me off guard with its directness. I thought about the Christmas card, formal and distant, yet sent nonetheless. About the photo of Aurora I still kept on my bedside table, alongside pictures of James. I've learned to live with uncertainty, I said finally. I hope yes. But my life doesn't depend on it anymore. Lily nodded thoughtfully. My mother and we haven't spoken in 3 years. Sometimes I think too much has happened to ever go back. I touched her arm gently. The door can remain open without letting people walk all over you. That's what James helped me understand. After Lily left, I returned to the garden where Robert was waiting, having given us privacy for the interview. You told her everything? He asked, sounding surprised. Most of it. I picked up my trowel, returning to the flower bed. She's writing about resilience. I realized I have something to offer there. Robert smiled. James would be proud of you, you know. Not just for standing up for yourself, but for finding your way forward. I pressed another bulb into the earth, patting the soil gently around it. I know. That evening, after Robert had gone, I sat in James's study, my study now, and opened my laptop. The memoir I'd started in my writing class was taking shape, one difficult, honest page at a time. I'd titled it The Last Legacy, not for the material possessions James had protected for me, but for the greater gift he'd given, the truth and the chance to reclaim my life. As I wrote, an email notification appeared in the corner of my screen. The address made my heart skip. Aurora_Reynolds@gmail.com. The message was brief. Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. Richard and I are separating. I've started therapy. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'd like to call you sometime. If that's okay. I sat back, emotions washing over me in waves, hope, caution, a mother's undying love. Outside my window, the garden lay in twilight. The newly planted bulbs nestled in the dark earth, waiting for their time to emerge. With steady hands, I typed my reply. I would like that very much. Your father always said it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I believe that's true for all of us. I pressed send, then returned to my writing. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For tonight, it was enough to know that even in his absence, James's wisdom continued to light our way forward. His last and most precious legacy.